TPMS, that's the topic for tonight. We did a webcast back in August. It's archived on the website that we went into TPMS service and repair, but that we got a lot of requests to do a similar topic again. This time we're going to invite someone who is really an expert in that arena. Let me, if I can bring him up to me. There we go. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, meet Mr. Steve Landis. Steve, good evening. How are you?
Good. How about yourself, Pete?
Good. Steve is, and I want to make sure I get this right, because I know this actually came through the emails a couple of times. Steve is the product program manager for the NAFTA Continental aftermarket TPMS program, right?
That's correct.
You've been with Continental since 2005 and
Yes.
Have spent most of your efforts in the development of the aftermarket and service activities and the tire pressure monitoring systems replacement parts category. And join us tonight. He is also a speaker, three-time speaker at the Tire Industry Association TPMS seminars as part of the Global Tire Expo that's held every year at SEMA. So you presented there. Yes. So he knows of which he speaks. Now, I was telling Steve earlier, we've had, when we did the August webcast, you know, we called all the guys who make the tools. You know, we talked to Snap-on and OTC and Bartech, and we asked them, we said, you guys got tech lines, right? And they say, yeah, we got, of course. So, okay, well, let's make sure the webcast is relevant. What are the most common questions that this guy, the new kid on the block, the guy who's just cutting his teeth in the business, doing the tire changes for you, you know, he needs to understand, number one, how to identify if the system has a TPMS sensor in it, and then how to properly service that TPMS sensor, and what to do to put it back into in sync with the car if need be. Very common problem. Youngster goes out, busts a tire, and when the tire's off, the pieces of the sensor are kind of rolling around in the bottom, right?
Sure, yeah.
Which is not good. You know, if your shop is not, you know, a 2-minute drive to the dealer to get that part, or the parts store to get that part, then you're kind of stuck, and your customer's not going to be happy. But Continental has got a solution for that, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I think it was about a year ago you introduced this to the media. Is that what we're going to be looking at?
This video is from 2010, but yeah, we launched redi-sensor actually in 2011, near the beginning of the year.
Yeah, so this is like a sneak peek, right, for some
Yes.
of the media folks. And I had to take a shine to it because one of my cohorts in crime, the lovely Krista McNamara, who is the managing editor of Aftermarket Business World for our group, actually plays a role in your video. So yes. Before we get real deep, we're going to go ahead and show this video. So let me pull that up. Take a look at this, guys. And then we'll come back to Steve, and we'll talk TPMS. All right? See you in a bit.
All right, this is the sensor we're going to use for today's demo. We're going to use this single sensor on all three vehicles. The three vehicles we have here today would be a 2009 Ford Fusion, 2010 Chevy Silverado, and 2006 Chrysler Pacifica. Now, just so that everyone knows we're using the same sensor here, We'll end up putting someone's initials on this. Would you be so kind to write your initials on the sensor? There you go. So we have someone's initials then on the sensor. We're going to start off with this sensor then on the 2009 Ford Fusion. And this vehicle right now has 4 OE sensors. The OE sensors are Lear banded sensors. We're going to end up replacing this front left sensor with this sensor. But first we're going to do a walk around and make sure everything's working the way it is, the way it's supposed to from the factory with the OE products.
And I would like to ask somebody in the audience to pick up a tool so that we'll play with this tool on this vehicle, or later on we can have another tool to make sure that the redi-sensor works. So, gentlemen? The Bartec 400. So this one. Okay.
Jean-Christophe's going to put the vehicle into the relearn mode. On a Ford, it's a sequence of key on, key off, press the brake, and then key on, key off. Symbolized by a horn honk. And now he will go around and just make sure the vehicle is learned with these OE sensors. Horn honk symbolizes that tire's been learned. Now he'll move to the next. On to the rear of the car, and you can also see, most technicians don't see, but the dashboard actually tells you which tire to learn. And when the relearn procedure is completed, it tells you on the dash. Matt, our technician, will remove this tire, then we're going to go over dismount. We'll just do a partial dismount just to get the banded sensor off. We'll remove that sensor and put the redi-sensor in. Torquing the nut to 71 inch-pounds.
So now, since we are going to do a relearn again, I'd like to ask the audience to choose a tool from this table. The green guy? Okay, I'll get the green guy.
Jean-Christophe will put it back into relearn mode again. As you know, on a Ford, if you don't know, the cycle is 3 cycles on, leave it on, press the brake, and then 3 more cycles, and when you end in the on position, it goes into relearn mode. Now, this sensor, unlike the other sensors on the OE, the banded sensors are 180 degrees from the valve stem. This is a redi-sensor, so it's at the valve stem. Instantly learned and recognized that sensor on the car. You confirm that with a horn honk. Now we're on the OE sensor. Notice how fast the redi-sensor learned or recognized the signal. It was very quick. OE sensors are a little slower. Jacques-Christophe, before this times out, do you want to try another tool, or are we going to let it time out?
I don't know, it's up to the audience. I mean, what I would like the audience to realize that the redi-sensor just answers straight away versus the NOE sensor having a hard time with this specific tool. So let's try with another tool. Okay.
And as you can see, the tire training is complete. You want to go ahead and raise this car, and we'll take that redi-sensor back off.
Whenever or whatever the tool you use, and we have a very large variety of tools right here on the table, the redi-sensor will always work with whatever tool you have. So which means that if in the shop you have an OTC tool, it won't work with the redi-sensor. Or if you have a wheelwright, Bartec 400 will work with redi-sensor.
I'm going to follow Matt over here. He's going to dismount this just to get the sensor out so that we can move on to the Silverado. Here's the redi-sensor. And we will change the component kit when we go to mount it on the Silverado.
All right, so we have this same sensor back then with the initials. You'll notice that we're not going to do any programming on this sensor. We're just going to take this right the way it is, and we're going to put it on the Silverado. We're going to end up installing it on this tire and wheel. But first we're going to do a walk around, make sure that everything with the OE system is working the way it should with all the OE sensors. I think most of you are aware, but the 2010 Silverado comes with OE Schrader snap-in sensors. You want to do the relearn on this and make sure everything's good?
On the GM, the relearn procedure on this one is just the key on, press and hold the door unlock and lock actuator on the key fob, and 2 horn sounds indicates relearn mode. Jean-Christophe gets a tool ready, and then as you notice, the lights on a GM, well, all the lights are on, but the lights will indicate the location at which you need to program. And 2 horn honks indicate a successful relearn. Matt will dismount this tire and we'll install the redi-sensor on this vehicle. Follow us around. This, since it's a Schrader snap-in and we need to remove it, we will have to do a full dismount on this wheel so that we can get the Schrader sensor out of there.
Sean, let's hold up the sensor again so everyone can see. It's the same sensor we had before.
As always, you change the component kit when you reinstall a sensor, so I'm removing the seal, and Matt will install a new seal and nut when we put it in the wheel for the Silverado. Matt's putting the seal on right now. Mount that in the wheel, torque the nut to 71 inch-pounds, and we'll remount the tire.
And as Sean was saying earlier, we end up doing a full service kit change when we're transferring this sensor from one vehicle to the next. The full service kit includes the seal washer, as well as the hex nut, the cap, and the valve core. Sean, what's the inflation for this one?
This one's 35 PSI.
VT55, okay. VT55. So as you can see, I have the VT55.
Again, the learn mode on this is key on, press and hold the lock buttons on the key fob, and it will go into relearn mode. Jean-Christophe will walk around and do the relearn, telling us that the left front is the first tire. Successful relearn on the left front, and this has the 3 OE sensors on it, and the redi-sensor is back here. Notice the time it took for each one on the OE, but then the redi-sensor, as soon as he put it down there, pressed the button, it relearned. We'll dismount this, remove the redi-sensor, and move on to the Chrysler Pacifica. Again, here's the redi-sensor. Same one we used in the first vehicle, second vehicle, now we're going to the third.
2006 Chrysler Pacifica. I still have the original sensor that we started with. Now in this vehicle, from the factory it came with Siemens VDO sensors, they're clamp-in style sensors. We've already switched out the sensors, so actually the 3 wheels and tires in the back there, they already have redi-sensor installed. And then in the front, we have just a plain valve stem. There's no sensor behind that. And the reason we did this was to simulate if you had a battery that died or if the sensor were to break. So what we have on the dash is a malfunction indicator then, because there's a missing sensor. Now we're going to use this sensor to fix that. Now with Chrysler vehicles, as you're aware, you have to drive the vehicle. So we will be pulling this out shortly after we install this sensor.
We will be taking a short drive, and I'll ask for 2 volunteers to ride with There'll be a cameraman in there and 2 volunteers to witness the successful relearn, since that's the way you do it with a Chrysler. Go ahead. Now we'll install it on the 3rd vehicle and go for a relearn. All right, we'll get Matt to reinstall this, and then I need 2 people. Who's coming with? All right, you can see that it has 1 tire low and service tire soon. And on a Chrysler, you have to drive 25 kilometers. I think it's 15 miles an hour for, I think it's about 15 minutes. So we're going to get on the interstate where we can do this. Okay. We just had a successful relearn.
I was going to say, we've just lost our malfunction.
Yep. So we relearned, and I missed this. I didn't think it would happen that quick. Had a successful relearn. Got on the interstate, drove about a mile and a half.
Yeah, as Sean said, I want you to talk about what we saw. I wish that we saw more, because it was so fast. We just basically got on there. We're talking about how it would take maybe 6 or 7 minutes to do a relearn, maybe as much as 15. And while we're talking, the malfunction light goes out, and we're just seeing which way we're traveling. It was, 5 minutes? Not even 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was done. Very uneventful.
Very quick. Thank you.
And please, I didn't pay him. I don't know him. I didn't pay him.
Thank you for watching our video redi-sensor program. We hope you enjoyed it. You can learn more information at redi-sensor.com.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you found that interesting. I think it was really cool, and I got Steve on standby here, but I think it was really cool about that whole demonstration is they used the same sensor in all 3 of these different vehicles. So that was pretty neat. And as you can see, I've got a little slide up here first. I'm going to go ahead and let Steve take the lead on what he wants to talk about tonight on TPMS. Of course, the chat window is available. Use that to ask your questions, offer your comments. I'll try to keep a monitor on that, and we'll interject them as need be. Other than that, Steve, show's all yours, buddy.
All right, thanks, Pete. We can go to that next slide then.
There you go.
Okay. All right. As far as Continental goes, the first line there, top 5 automotive OE suppliers in the world. Of course, we're here to talk about TPMS, but we manufacture a huge variety of products. In regard to TPMS, we manufacture the receivers, the sensors, and of course also we're a huge manufacturer of tires. So we have a wide knowledge base of everything regarding tires and TPMS. Of course, leading supplier for OE and aftermarket products. So this includes, we offer the replacement sensor assemblies and also the service kits. Service kits would be used whenever you break down a tire, whenever you're servicing a tire. The full sensor assemblies would be required when the battery dies, or if you end up damaging a sensor, whether it's from technician damage or if it's accident damage, etc. As far as options for replacement sensors, we have the video redi-sensor, which you had seen the video on, but there's also the OE product, which we will continue to offer. These would be the same thing that you would buy at the car dealership and the same product that came off of the vehicle from the factory. So we offer that assortment of products. We can go to the next slide then.
Okay, you're up.
Okay. All right, and then just to talk a little bit more about redi-sensor, I know you guys had a chance to see that full video, so I won't spend too much time on this, but of course if you got questions later, feel free. But we feel that this is a truly game-changing advancement in TPMS service, because the idea here is that instead of having so many OE sensor SKUs that you would have to stock or have readily available in case you needed to service a vehicle or a particular vehicle, whether it's domestic or Asian or European, we're trying to focus as much as possible on reducing that SKU count. So instead of having to carry this 100+ SKUs of OE sensors, now you can consolidate considerably. Our initial focus was on domestic vehicles, and we're getting more into the Asian vehicles, and then after that we'll move on to European vehicles. Over 80% of the vehicles in the U.S. are already covered by the 3 redi-sensor SKUs, and they're shown there in the image to the right. These sensors, as you guys had seen in the video, they're pre-programmed. They're ready to use right out of the box. The idea with this program was, from the get-go, we wanted to make sure that these sensors performed like an OE sensor, so that when you become familiar with servicing an OE sensor, you can seamlessly change back and forth between redi-sensor and OE sensors. So you would end up installing this on the vehicle without any programming of the sensor itself, and you install it on the vehicle, and then you do the vehicle relearn process just like you would do with the OE sensors. And you can mix and match if you want to have redi-sensor, but you want to keep a few of the OE sensors because, say, only one of the OE sensors is broken. That's no problem. Or if you want to end up replacing all of them with redi-sensor, of course, we appreciate that for the business, but it's not something that's required. You can mix and match. They're designed to work with all major TPMS scan tools. As you guys had seen in the video, there were a variety of tools that we had laid out on the table there. You can just use those tools. A lot of these industry tools that you guys are familiar with, from ATEC and BARTEC and OTC, the TIPS tool, K-Tool, all of these brands, those would work with redi-sensor just like with OE sensors. And as I was mentioning, they're designed to follow the existing OE vehicle relearn procedure. So if you guys are familiar with that, you can use redi-sensor and OE sensor without having to learn anything new, which is what we wanted to do from the get-go to make this as simple as possible for the service technician.
So let me clarify real quick there, Steve, for some of us who aren't familiar with that side of the business. SKU, that's like a part number, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So in other words, instead of having to stock several dozen varieties, the shop can cover almost 80% of what they might run into with the 3?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to clarify that SKU thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a wrench. I don't know SKU.
All right. Yeah. Sorry. Stock unit. Yes. We can go to the next slide then.
There you are.
Okay. All right. So then, TPMS sensor service tips. Some things I wanted to mention to you guys as far as with TPMS. I think some people are still, of course, unfamiliar with what the proper service is. And what ends up happening with this is everyone in the past with traditional style non-TPMS equipped wheels and tires, you would end up changing the traditional valve stem each time you would do tire service. And really what the service kits with TPMS are is that's really the equivalent now with these new TPMS equipped vehicles. So in the past, you were doing those traditional stem replacements, and now you would be doing service kit replacement. The service kits, it varies by the application, but typically you would end up having, if you have a snap-in style sensor, you would have a rubber stem that would have to be replaced. If you have a clamp-in style sensor, you would have a hex nut and a valve core, as well as a seal, and sometimes there's a metal washer in there as well. So there's different types, and I'll get more into that in a future slide. But these parts will require servicing much like you would replace that traditional stem in the past. And what that really is that's preventive maintenance for the much more expensive sensor. You're helping to ensure the longevity and the integrity of the sensor going forward for your customer. So we get into that next bullet there, the proper service kit and/or sensor should be used. With service kits, there's a wide variety of service kits, and you really need to watch the application as far as what service kit you're going to be using. There's certainly differences in design for sensors that are out there, particularly, of course, with the OE designs. So there's a large variety of them out there that you need to be aware of and service properly. As far as sensors, of course, the thing that we're trying to do to make it easier is instead of having to put your arms around 100 SKUs, 100 part numbers of sensors. Now you can focus more on the 3 ready sensors or some of the other competitive products that would be out there that also try to consolidate part numbers. But as far as service kits go, for the time being, service kits for OE products, that's still widespread. There's a lot of part numbers out there that you'll need to stock and need to have at hand. As far as demand for TPMS sensor service, of course, this is increasing and will continue to grow. Right now, as an estimation, you're talking 70 to 80 million vehicles have direct TPMS in the U.S. right now. And this will only continue with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, their ruling, which required all vehicles as of model year 2008 and forward to have a TPMS system. So this will just continue to grow exponentially going forward. I think that we're still really in the infancy of this.
Yeah, there was just something out in the social networks there. I don't know if you saw that or not, Steve, but there was actually I can't remember the newswire source that actually printed an article about the importance of maintaining proper tire pressures, the impact on safety, the impact on accident causes, by maintaining proper tire pressures. And this is one system that was designed to do that. It all came birth out of that Firestone fiasco several years ago.
Yes, absolutely. TPMS is there for safety. That's the predominant reason. Of course, there's also other things that end up going along with that, because like you're saying, by maintaining proper tire pressure, there's other aspects as well beyond safety, such as you help to ensure the longevity of the tires, you maximize miles per gallon. By maintaining that tire pressure, you also end up improving the handling characteristics of the vehicle as versus having an underinflated tire.
Sure.
Hydroplaning avoidance, reduced stopping distances, all of these things go hand in hand with proper tire pressure.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm ready to move on to the next slide then.
There you go.
Okay. All right, so as far as sensor types that are out there, there's a couple different varieties. The way we consolidated this was starting with programmable sensors. These would be aftermarket sensors exclusively. These sensors, what ends up happening is when you take the actual sensor out of the box, the sensor itself requires some programming prior to installation on the vehicle. There's definitely some versions that are out there now, but they're blank when you receive them, and you'll need a specialized programming tool before you start to actually install them on the vehicle and use them. As far as pre-programmed sensors, we break these down into the valve type and the valveless type. And if you look in the images on the right there, that top sensor there, that's one of our valve type sensors. Specifically, it's actually a clamp-in sensor. And to elaborate on that just a little bit, what differentiates it as a clamp-in sensor is because there's a hex nut that's threaded in place, and that effectively clamps it onto the wheel. And of course, the valve is actually part of the sensor. So it's a valve type sensor. The next bullet there, the valveless type sensors, there's an image of those as well. Unfortunately, it's kind of a small image. But within that band there, there's a stainless steel wheel band. And residing in the center there, there's 2 valveless sensors. And some of you guys are probably familiar with these by now. Those sensors, they are not part of the valve. They actually mount to the drop center of the wheel with that stainless steel band. And they're supposed to be 180 degrees from the actual valve stem itself, which would be a traditional looking type valve stem. So it can throw people off. There might be the impression, of course, that the vehicle is not TPMS equipped. But you have to watch out for that, because in this instance, it wouldn't be obvious because there's not a clamp-in metal stem. There would be a traditional rubber-style stem, but it's still TPMS equipped. And sometimes these bands, they'll actually walk a little bit on the drop center of the wheel. So you think that the sensor itself is 180 degrees from the valve stem, but over time, they can walk a little bit, and they might be in a location that you're not expecting. So you have to be careful when you're when you're dismounting the tires and servicing these sensors. As far as multi-application, multi-protocol sensors go, this is another version that would be much like the programmable sensors up at the top. This is an aftermarket-only sensor. The multi-application, multi-protocol sensors would be redi-sensor. And what happens with this, of course, the idea is to consolidate the part numbers and to make it easier just to stock everything and have everything right there at the ready when you need to service a vehicle. So I'm ready to move on to the next slide then, if you are.
There you go.
All right. As far as TPMS terminology, to explain this a little bit further, programming, the way that we use this, and I've heard a lot of other ways that people will use this terminology. Programming, in our view, is really when you're programming a blank sensor. So if you have a universal style sensor that's an aftermarket sensor, and when you get it out of the box, it's blank, this is what we would term needs to be programmed prior to installation on the vehicle. Relearn, that terminology is referring to the actual vehicle relearn itself. So after you install a sensor onto the vehicle, you would have to do a relearn, whether it would be a sensor that you had to program, or if it's an OE sensor, or if it's redi-sensor, you would still do the vehicle relearn itself. And this varies by vehicle. Sometimes it's as simple as something where you install the sensor on the vehicle and you drive, like we had shown in the video for a Chrysler. And there's other vehicles out there too. Mazda's another good example where you install the sensor and you drive and it auto relearns then. There's other vehicles which are more commonplace where you would end up having a scan tool that's required. And we'll actually show you some scan tools in the next slide where you would use the scan tool to trigger the sensor from its sleep mode or shelf mode. And once that sensor then is activated, it can be learned to the vehicle. To initiate a relearn in the vehicle, sometimes you would have to do things such as pressing buttons on the key fob or doing an ignition cycling with the key to actually tell the vehicle, hey, I've got a new sensor that we need to learn to you. And this is actually then typically identified by a horn honk from the vehicle. And then as you work your way around the vehicle, as you guys saw in the video, you'll get a horn chirp that identifies that that sensor location was learned successfully to the vehicle. Sometimes with these scan tools, you don't need to have an OBD2 hookup. Other times you do. And actually the thing that I want to make sure that people understand is sometimes with Chrysler and Mazda, technicians are uncomfortable or it's just not practical to actually drive the vehicle to get that auto relearn capability. So there is the possibility that instead of doing that, you can take these TPMS scan tools that have OBD2 hookups and you can hook that up to the vehicle and you can do a relearn without having to drive the vehicle. So that's proven to be very beneficial to some people. Because they can't drive their customer's vehicle for whatever reason. The next bullet there, the ready-to-use sensors. Of course, I've pretty much summarized that already, but with programmable sensors, those sensors would have to be programmed prior to use on the vehicle. So that would not be a ready-to-use sensor. A ready-to-use sensor would be an OE-style sensor, and then, of course, we've developed a redi-sensor to be ready to use out of the box as well. So those style of sensors would be ready to use. Programming blank sensors, we talked about that some already. Some people like that capability, especially if they have the proper scan tools to use them. But you will need specialized scan tools to use these sensors. As far as the vehicle relearn, just to sort of go through those bullets, I feel like we've covered some of this already. But of course, you need to perform the vehicle relearn every time there's a sensor replacement or tire rotation. And what this really is, in summation, is based on what we understand from the Tire Industry Association. It's really imperative that you end up doing this vehicle relearn to ensure that the sensors have learned successfully to the vehicle, so that you have that confidence when the customer picks up the vehicle that, in fact, the whole process was completed as you had expected and that the customer won't be coming back. at least not for TPMS service right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need to stress here, too, a couple of things. That number one, guys, this is a safety system. So, it's not something that's there to cause the driver aggravation. It's there to help protect him and his family, her and his family, whatever the case may be. So you want to, when you're having an issue with TPMS, you want to stress that to that customer. That the light's on, it's on for a reason, maybe just a low tire, or it could be something more, but that's a safety system that needs to be treated like any other system on the car. The other thing you want to make a habit of doing, and I'm going to interject this real quick.
Sure.
As Steve pointed out, that some of these older systems or some of these models use a banded sensor. Some have rubber valve stems. They look like a normal valve stem to the untrained eye, so to speak. So you may not, your general service tech may not realize that car has a TPMS system to begin with, unless he takes the time to look for the TPMS indicator on the key on bulb check. So make that a habit when you're bringing a car in. You should be checking the warning lights anyway, but look for that TPMS light in particular to illuminate when you turn the key on, to advise you that, hey, you need to check this car, for TPMS. Of course, as Steve pointed out, anything over 08 and more is going to be TPMS equipped. There's no question about that. But check that, and if the light's on steady when you bring it in, you want to know that ahead of time too. Maybe you do a rotation or you do a flat repair, and you didn't do anything to the car. But if you didn't notice that the light was on when you brought it in and reported it ahead of time, well, we've all been there, done that, right, guys? We've heard that. It wasn't like that one before I got here deals. So make sure you cover your own butt and you check those kind of things as you bring the car in for service.
Yes, absolutely. And Pete, you're hitting on some great points, perhaps stealing a little bit of the thunder of the presentation, the future slides.
Oh, sorry.
But no problem at all. But just to sort of hit back on some of your points, it's a very good thing to emphasize, of course, the customers, is how important the system is. And if you emphasize the safety of the system and the reasoning for the system to be on the vehicle to begin with, I think it's a lot easier to explain why there's a charge for a replacement sensor or there's a charge for service kits, just to make sure that the customer understands what they're actually paying for and how important it really is for the safety of the vehicle and their family.
Absolutely.
And of course, what you're saying, Pete, as well, in regard to checking the system prior to actually bringing the vehicle into your shop bay, that's imperative, because if there is something that's wrong with the system beforehand, you want to identify that to the customer and make sure that they're aware that there may be some charges regarding a sensor that might be dead or even missing, or if there's, unfortunately, if there's galvanic corrosion, where some of the metal components show a lot of wear, or if the snap-in sensors themselves, which I'll explain momentarily, if those end up looking like they're damaged, etc. You want to try to identify that to the customer right away. And like you're saying, Pete, in regard to actually finding out if there's something wrong with the system, one of the surefire ways, of course, is to look for that icon on the dash. But some people prefer to actually try using the TPMS scan tool as well, just to see if they get an answer back from each of the tire and wheels.
Oh, yeah.
To see, is there a sensor on there, and is it functioning as it should be?
Sure.
And of course, just a visual check can go a long way too. Like you're saying, there's these traditional valve stems that can throw people off, but that doesn't mean that it's not TPMS equipped.
Right.
So, it still can go a long way, though, just to check and make sure that everything's intact there. And if you do have a metal stem with a hex nut, of course, you do have TPMS there on the vehicle.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, but, yeah, I think we pretty much covered this slide. So I think it's safe to move on. What do you think?
On to the next one.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so this shows a lot of the TPMS scan tools that are out there, and it's by no means all of them. There's a large variety that are out there, but it gives you an image of some of the most popular versions. The TIPS tools there are shown. There's a number of BARTEC tools, ATEC tools, Down there in the lower right, some people will recognize that as not just a TPMS scan tool, but of course more of a full-on diagnostic tool for vehicle maintenance, which would be the OTC Genesis. So these scan tools, as well as that diagnostic tool, these tools have the capability to work with TPMS. They have different capabilities, though. Some of them are more advanced than others. It really depends on what your shop is seeing. So if you're seeing a lot of vehicles, just sort of generically to lump these as just domestics, if that's really the main thing you're working with, you don't necessarily need the most advanced scan tool to get by. You might want to have it so that you have more capabilities, and some of these other scan tools that are more advanced, they'll allow you to actually print out information regarding the status of the TPMS system. But you might be able to use a TIPS tool and be very happy with that, and that'll be great, because what you really need to do is just to wake up a sensor from its sleep mode for a lot of the domestic vehicles.
Yeah,
now,
in fact, I got to throw the plug in there, Steve. Sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure.
we actually did an after-hours comparison of some of the top TPMS tools. So if you're interested in taking a closer look at some of them, go back to the motorage.com community, to the after-hours collection, and you'll find it there. Just use the keyword TPMS, and you'll see everything on the website that we have to offer. So exactly how those tools work.
All right, yeah, that's great. So I won't spend too much time on it, but when you get into servicing a lot of the Asian vehicles and some of the European vehicles as well, you'll need a more advanced scan tool because you'll need that OBD capability where you hook it up to the OBD2 port in the vehicle. So it really depends on what vehicles you're servicing and, of course, what kind of volume you're seeing and if you feel like it's necessary or if it's warranted based on customer requests to have a printout that actually shows the status of the system before and after service. So I think it's good to move on. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this next slide here, this goes into just some things that I've come across, as well as some things that have been suggested to me based on some of the technicians that have dealt with TPMS. Use extra care when breaking down or mounting a tire. Check the system before you bring it into your shop bay and alert the customer to anything that you notice that doesn't look right. If there's a malfunction indicator where it's flashing, or if you just have low tire pressure, if it's as simple as that, you'll still want to mention this to the customer going forward and make sure that they know that, of course, the tire needs to be properly inflated to the placard pressure. The extra care should be taken regardless of whether or not you think that it's a clamp-in sensor or a snap-in sensor or the valveless style sensors. And let me just explain that a little bit further. You saw some images of the clamp-in style sensors where it's actually a metal valve stem. And those are a little bit more obvious because, of course, visually when you see them, you know that's a clamp-in style sensor. The snap-in style sensors actually have a sensor that's on the back side of the valve, just like the clamp-in style, but it's a traditional looking valve stem. So be careful of that. They're installed on a number of vehicles, mostly model year 2009, 2010 going forward. And then, of course, you'll see some of these valveless sensors as well, predominantly on Ford, but also some Mazdas. There's also some styles that are installed on older Corvettes. So some of you guys might have run into those as well. And those sensors then, they would have a traditional valve stem, but there is definitely a sensor that's hidden within the wheel there that's mounted at the drop center.
Yeah.
So just be aware, when you're breaking down the tire and be conscious of trying to watch out for that sensor. It's not something you want to break because, of course, it's costly to replace. As far as replacing service parts, that's just something that you want to do. We talked about it some previously, but as far as these service kit parts, whether for clamp-in style sensors, it's the hex nut and the valve core and the grommet, and there might be a washer as well as a cap that's in there. You want to replace those every time you do tire service just to ensure the longevity and the serviceability of the system going forward. And sometimes, of course, if you have a snap-in sensor, what you end up replacing is not just a traditional TPMS service kit, but instead you'll be replacing the snap-in valve itself, which looks like a traditional stem, but in fact, then there would probably be a screw that would mount to the back of the sensor inside the wheel. So these parts would be sold as service packs, and you guys are probably pretty familiar with those, but the service pack is really by application, and they're all out there, but unfortunately there's a large number of them that you'll have to carry and have available. As far as always using new TPMS specific parts, this is an important thing too, because I've seen some people where they try to end up using, say, a traditional brass core instead of the TPMS cores. And that can be a problem, because what ends up happening is you could have galvanic corrosion, where the valve core then, because you used the traditional brass core, that core will actually end up seizing inside the valve stem. And then by having that seized in there, you can no longer properly service the sensor itself. And you'll have to, sooner or later, you'll have to replace the whole sensor, which is, of course, costly versus just replacing the service packs. Never reuse parts. To get into a little more detail about that, the nut itself would end up having, for the clamp-in sensors, it ends up, when you clamp that down to the proper torque specifications, it actually ends up over time, because of that torque stress and because it's metal to metal components, it's a metal hex nut and a metal stem, you end up potentially having galvanic corrosion, especially if it's exposed to an extreme environment over the winter when you have a lot of saline solution, salt spray on the roads. This can lead to degradation of the metals. And to avoid this, of course, you just want to service the parts properly. Make sure you replace those service kits going forward. Just it's really the same thing that you've done in the past. When you service a traditional non-TPMS equipped tire, you end up replacing that traditional stem. It's the same idea with this. You just want to do that for maintenance. The grommet and the seal, it's the same idea. They would come in the service pack in addition to the hex nut. The grommet and the seal, they take a seat because they have rubber components, and once that seat has been pressed down, the elastomer, the rubber components, will not ever spring back 100% because they took that form to the contour of the wheel as well as to the contour of the rest of the componentry. So you want to make sure that those parts, after they've been used, they're not reused. The core ends up having actually two challenges. It could potentially have galvanic corrosion over time, as well as within the core there's very tiny grommets, little seals that are built in there that can have elastomer wear out over time, and you just want to make sure you replace those. And then the valve stem, that's more of a part that needs to be replaced for the valveless sensors, as well as these snap-in sensors that would have rubber style stems. There's also a few clamp-in style sensors that are out there that require replacement of the stem whenever you service the tire and wheel as well. So you just want to watch out for these parts, because if you're not replacing these parts over time, you end up having to replace the full sensor assembly prematurely. The torque wrench, as far as using a torque tool, it's imperative, of course, to not guess when you're torquing these components. When you're torquing down the hex nut on the clamp-in style sensors, when you're torquing down the screw that's actually on the backside of the snap-in sensors, or when you're torquing down the worm gear, the screw that's actually used for the wheel bands for the valveless sensors. All of these parts have proper torque specifications that should be followed. So it's important to do this to make sure that you have a proper air seal, and to make sure, of course, that you don't damage the components if you over-torque them. And then for the spare tire, I think that this one's worthwhile to mention too. A lot of people, I think, unfortunately go on a wild goose chase with this, because if you have a full-size spare, it's very likely equipped with a direct tire pressure sensor. So a lot of systems out there that have donut spares, they would end up having only 4 tire pressure sensors. But if you have a full-size spare, you might have a 5th sensor. And if you see the light on, whether it's a malfunction indicator or if it's instead just for low tire pressure, you might be running around checking each of the 4 tires and you can't figure out what the problem is. Be sure to check the spare.
Yeah, and I hate it when it's the spare that's underneath the SUV with the valve stem facing up.
Yes, and you got to drop the access.
You got to drop the tire.
Absolutely. Yeah, but at least if you know that that could be a problem area, now you know you got to check it out. So those are pretty much the main things I wanted to throw out there to make sure people were aware of and to look out for.
That's a bunch.
Yes, it's a lot of stuff to digest.
Yeah. So
actually, that next slide there, if you got questions going forward and it's something that you think of, an hour from now, or you think of it a week from now or a year from now, you can contact me there. That's the phone number as well as the email. You can ask me questions. And, I'm there to help as far as for the VDO parts. And if you got questions about just anything in general regarding TPMS, I'm there to try to help you guys to make life a little bit easier when you're servicing TPMS.
Cool. Let me pull him back up here.
Okay.
There he is. Well, that was a lot of information there, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
First
absolutely.
question that we got out there for you, is there a life limit on the battery? How long are these batteries and these things going to last?
Yes, there is. And actually, as of right now, regardless of the manufacturer, if you're talking about OE sensors and you're talking about OE-derived sensors, those products, so I would be referring to, if it's a sensor that came from the Ford factory or the GM factory or whatever it might be, as well as, and that would be the OE sensors, as well as OE-derived sensors such as redi-sensor. These products would have a lifespan of approximately 7 to 10 years, regardless of the actual manufacturer. I know that's sort of summarizing everything there altogether, but it is actually a pretty good idea because based on the OEM requirements, that's really the lifespan that most people would see. If you're talking about solely aftermarket sensors, especially some of the brands that would be out there that are knockoffs, overseas manufacturers, a lot of them you'll see they might be more in the 5-year time span. But if you're talking about OE sensors or OE-derived sensors, it's really roughly 7 to 10 years. The sensor does not have a replaceable battery, and that goes for all manufacturers.
Sure.
So once the battery dies, you have to replace the whole sensor.
Yes, and the other part of that question, is there an expiration date stamped on the sensor?
No, there isn't, because the reason for this is actually with tire pressure sensors that are out there, with the OE sensors and the OE-derived sensors, they all have a shelf mode or a sleep mode.
Sure.
What ends up happening there is the sensor is really conserving, not 100%, but almost 100% of its battery life when it's sitting and not in use. Not until it's actually pressurized and on a vehicle does it wake up and begin actively transmitting, particularly, of course, when the vehicle is in motion. Roughly 95% of the time that a sensor is installed on a vehicle, it's still in sleep mode to help to maintain that battery life. It's really only 5% roughly of the time that a sensor is installed on a vehicle that's actually in motion. And because of the fact that a sensor might sit on a shelf for, say, a year or 2 years, or who knows, maybe it's even more than that, before it's installed, you don't really know how long the sensor will last. And particularly if you think about this as well, if you have, say, a taxi driver where he's driving, maybe it's 100,000 miles a year, that sensor, whether it's an OE sensor or even if it's an aftermarket sensor, it might only last a year or 2 years. But if you have instead somebody that's like a grandma that's just going to get groceries down the street once a week, that sensor could last for 12 years.
Sure. So another reason to check those things, when it comes in for service.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple other points I wanted to bring out that you made during your presentation. Cores. Replacing the valve cores, absolutely agree with that 100%, but there is a difference between a TPMS core versus a traditional stem core, right?
Yes, there is. Now, the only thing that causes some confusion is, of course, if you have a valveless style sensor that would be installed on some of the Ford vehicles, Mazdas,
right,
and some of the Corvettes, that would be a traditional stem.
Right.
But then if you're talking about a snap-in style sensor or if you're talking about a clamp-in style sensor, they have different stems than traditional stems. So you have to use the specific components that were designed for that.
Don't grab one off the floor by the tire machine.
No,
Use
because
the service
you could.
kit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, it's everything that you've seen us do, here or on our print features or wherever else. We always stress, go by the OE service guidelines, do it right. Yes, your customer needs to buy the component kits if he's getting the tire changed or he's getting new tires put on, but that's just the cost of doing business. That's the cost of getting that work done.
Sure, absolutely.
So don't feel bad, that you have to do that. That you're doing a proper professional job by replacing the kits components that Steve mentioned and torquing them to the proper torque.
Yes,
It's
that's
way
imperative.
too easy, especially for a youngster starting out or someone who's new, to over torque. And then what are you gonna lose a expensive sensor, over a few bucks for the nut, or a torque wrench? Come on, that just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
The other thing I want to kind of hit on really quick, you mentioned when we saw this whole line of tools that can be used, and of course the redi-sensor is compatible with all of them.
Right.
But what I wanted to point out and see what you think of this, when we did our August webcast, we kind of broke it down like this for everybody. The domestic TPMS sensors, it seems that the factories are okay with their control modules doing the learning on their own. But it seems a lot of the imports don't trust the modules to do the learning on their own. They want you to write the data using that OBD2 port. Is that a fair assessment?
That is, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really, you have to, as Steve mentioned, that's what you want to look at across your board. If you're doing 90% domestic, basic TPMS tool is probably okay. But if you're doing any serious Asian business or import business, then you are going to need to look for a tool that gives you that connectivity. And let me try to clarify here for everybody, if you're not sure what we're talking about. On domestic relearn is usually a way to put the vehicle into learn mode, and then sometimes they want you to let the air in or add air or whatever. If you don't really need to do anything that, like you pointed out, you just want to wake the sensor up, and then the car is going to recognize it's there, and you hear the beep, and you're done. That takes care of the domestics. But the Asians have the numbers. They have ID numbers. And when you replace a sensor with an old one with a replacement, you've got to tell that control module that, okay, I replaced 00975 with 10723, and you have to write those IDs in. So that's the difference. Are there any other questions, guys, there, or any other comments you want to make, Steve?
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick and mention that you're absolutely right as far as needing those OBD2 style scan tools. But for domestic, there is still, of course, a sensor ID that's associated with each sensor. Mm-hmm. But the way that the relearn works for that vehicle is you don't have to hook up the OBD2 tool, but there's still actually a handshake between the vehicle system, the receiver itself, and the sensor, where it says, oh, okay, there's a new sensor with, manufacturer ID 123, and I just put that into the actual receiver, and I understand now.
Cool.
So, yep.
Yeah, I get. Okay, yeah, that clarifies that quite a bit. Well, fellas, if there's no other questions, I want to take time here to say, Steve, I really appreciate you coming out and sharing what you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Thank you so much, Pete.
Everybody got a lot of knowledge from it and a lot of questions answered. Of course, just to recap, if you want any information, you go to www.redi-sensor.com, and you can get some more information there. Of course, we'll post the links here when we get the archived up online, for your viewing later on. So until January or June 26th, when we broadcast live from Skills USA, this is Pete Meier and Steve Landis saying good night and thanks for joining us.